Good morning. This is the Eager Beaver Show.
You are listening to a True North Eager Beaver Media Podcast. The True North Eager Beaver podcasts are proudly brought to you by our founding sponsors, the Miss V Mysteries from Corvid Moon Publishing, your source for science fiction, fantasy, and cozy mysteries featuring a broad diversity of characters. CanadianTarot.com, your uniquely Canadian online eclectic tarot community and forum, and The Peppermaster, hot pepper sauces made from fresh farm ingredients to thrill your taste buds and expand your mind. Well, good morning and hello, kids, and welcome to Season 3 and episode number 37 of the True North Eager Beaver Interview Project. Yes, kitties, we have a special for you today. Today, recording day is Wednesday, November 22nd, 2023, and it looks like it's going to be a gray and maybe a little bit of a cold day here at the Beaver Lodge. We had some wet snow yesterday. Things were a little slippery. And of course, that gave me a couple of soakers at a couple of times yesterday. So and you'd think a beaver would like having wet feet. Nope.
No, not necessarily.
I'm your host, the Eager Beaver, pronouns he, him. Hey, Mr. Beaver A. And with me, as always, is my good friend, Mr. Grizzly. We have, as we mentioned, an interview for you, and we will introduce our guest very soon. But before we do that, let's do the most important thing we do here at the Beaver Lodge every day, and that's ask you, Mr. Grizzly, how's your mental health doing today, sir?
You know, I've been on a roll lately. I'm feeling good. Feeling really good. I'm not going to question. It's the gloomiest, darkest time of the year.
Yep.
Late November. It's still autumn, but there's snow on the ground. It's freezing rain. It's just miserable. But I feel good, so I'm going to continue to roll with it. And something you at the top of the show, you said the date, and it sparked an idea, sparked a memory in my head. November 22nd, 1963. What's significant about that date?
I don't remember.
Dealey Plaza, Dallas,
Yes,
Texas.
yes,
JFK.
60th anniversary.
60 years ago.
Yes.
Yeah, 60 years ago today.
Ooh,
Crazy.
yeah,
huh?
yeah. I heard that a couple of days ago. That was this week, but I didn't know it was today. Oh my,
Yeah.
yeah. Then okay, that's gonna be a big day. That's gonna be a big day down there. Big day for history too. It's always important
Yes.
to know your
And
history
it's tomorrow's Thanksgiving there too.
as well.
So.
Yeah. I think that, and oddly enough, most people think that maybe Christmas is the biggest travel day, but it's actually Thanksgiving in the
No, it's
United
not.
States for Thanksgiving. All
That's
right.
right.
I'm feeling well. I actually got more than 4 hours sleep last night. Yay. So I'm feeling chipper. But hey, let's get to it. Our guest today, kids, is a physicist and a politician. So when I say we need less clever and we need more smart,
Yes.
all right?
Yes.
We have a physicist.
I don't feel I should be in the same room with this man. I'm not smart enough for that.
He moved to Kingston when he was 6 months old, when his father joined Queen's University as a chemical engineering professor. It's almost like Alex.
Yes, no kidding, right? It's wild.
Yeah, really. Attended high school at Loyalist College, Collegiate and Vocational Institute, graduated from Queen's University with a Bachelor of Science, Honors in Physics, pursued graduate studies at Princeton, where he completed his PhD in physics in 1989.
Yeah, classic underachiever.
Yes, classic underachiever.
What's he doing here?
He has been in politics for a while. He was the member of parliament provincially. No, sorry, not provincially, federally for Kingston, the Islands, from 2011 to 2015. Then took some personal time, then came back in the last provincial election in Ontario, and was one of the only, if the only, Liberal to actually flip a Conservative seat back to Liberal in that election. Um, he is running,
That's awesome.
yes, for the leadership of the Ontario Liberal Party. And for some reason, I thought, when they announced that the leadership was coming, I says, I wonder if this guy, given that he was the only one to flip a seat, would probably enter. And sure enough. So without any further ado, kits and cubs, put your paws up and give a round of applause for Mr. Ted Sue. Good morning, sir.
What an introduction. Good morning.
Now, before we do anything, as we always do on the show, open transparency, and I mentioned it way back when we did it. But for the leadership race, I did help Mr. Sue with some media training and some public speaking training. So just to put the cards on the table so that everybody knows the whole deal, because we believe in transparency and honesty here. But let's get on with the interview. Thank you so much for joining us. It's lovely to see you.
Yes.
Oh, it's good to see you.
You look like you're in a great mood.
Yeah, well, I just got out, I just slept, so.
A little late because we were texting. We both did not get a full 8 hours, let's put it that way.
Well, what's 8 hours?
Well,
how is your mental health today?
Looks like you have a lot of regulars here. So
yes.
Welcome to everybody.
Yeah. All right. We always ask everybody when we start the show how your mental health is today. So how's your mental health today?
How's my mental health? I think it's good because we're coming to the end of a campaign that's been over a year, and the voting is this weekend. So everything's coming to an end, and it's certainly stressful. But because there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and that light is something that raises your spirits.
It gives the energy for the final push too, right? I've noticed that when it comes to choir shows or plays or whatnot, sometimes you get a little tired if you like a couple of weeks in and it's like, okay, there's only 2 more weeks, let's go. And then you give it a nice little push. Ted, we'll start with a basic question. Why are you in the race?
Well, I'm in the race because we're facing so many tough, I call them crises, the affordability and housing and the healthcare system in quotes, because it's not good enough to call a system. We have mental health and addictions crisis. We also have the climate crisis. So all of these things together, plus young people are inheriting a larger government debt. So that's less room to spend money and do things. It's less of a future to mortgage now, unfortunately. And because we're facing all of these things at once, I'm a problem solver, and I want to really jump in and lead the effort, at least for my party, to try to tackle these problems. And I believe in liberalism in the sense that I believe in wanting to change things to make them better, but doing it in a thoughtful way. And the Liberal Party, however, has to get its act together. Lost 2 elections in a row badly. And I think I'm the one who can, first of all, unify the Liberal Party, get everybody rowing in the same direction, but then also make connections with people outside the party. That's something that I feel that I'm good at, making connections with people in different parts of the province. I am the only one who represents, out of all the leadership candidates, who represents a rural and urban riding. I think my French is better than everybody else, and then I also have that Chinese background too, to make some cultural connections. But I also have this background I worked in science, I worked in business and finance, and I worked in environment. I worked in housing, all of these outside of politics. And these allow me to not only make connections with different people, but grab hold of the tough issues and think about, I think it's time to think about bold, out of the box solutions. Because I think people expect their governments to take these problems and really treat them like crises. And sometimes the rational, thoughtful thing to do is a jump. It's not incremental. And I feel that we're in that situation with all of these affordability, healthcare, climate issues. So I think I'm the one to unify the Liberal Party and help it be able to do better in the next election, to reorganize, to draw in new members, to get people who stayed at home last time to get out and vote, and draw some people who are sitting on the fence between the Liberal Party and the NDP or the Greens or the Red Tories, because I feel that I'm good at making connections with people who might lean a little bit towards the other parties. I'm not a knee-jerk partisan kind of politician.
Mhm.
Well, that's good. That's paramount, I think, because I'm getting some feedback here somewhere. Just give me a sec. I'm just going to put you on mute there for a sec, Mr. Sue. Yeah, we're getting a little bit of feedback there, but it's okay. I can work it through. I think that that is paramount due to the fact that the last couple of elections have been so partisan, so dividing of everybody on, especially on the left side of the margin, if you will. I mean, I watched a couple of those debates, and the only person in the debates in the last provincial election that made any sense to me was Mike Schreiner. I got it right that time,
Yes.
right? I always want to call him Mike Greiner, and I have no idea why. Mike Schreiner was the only one who stuck to the topic at hand, whereas the Liberal and NDP leader at the time, whose names I won't bother to mention, were just attacking one another instead of attacking the actual premier who had done the terrible things to the province. So if you can start to unite the left, if you will, and like you say, the red Tories, and just bring them more onto the side of let's make the province a better place to live, because under the Ford regime, as I call it, unless you're a wealthy donor, you don't matter to him. I mean, we've seen it with the Greenbelt scandal. We've noticed it, what happened, like with the recent deployment of the XBB variant of the COVID vaccine. Who's distributing that? Oh, that's right, a private industry. And which private industry? Oh, Galen Weston's private industry. He's distributing it to every pharmacy across the province. Well, it's funny that a lot of small independent pharmacies can't get the product. I wonder why that is. So it's like, shouldn't provincially we be doing this and not through, some for-profit endeavor? It's just like there's so much corruption with the current provincial party that it turns my stomach on a daily basis. I mean, we know about the iron ring around the shareholders for long-term care homes. We know about the what is it, $4 billion cut from healthcare, or $2 billion, I don't recall, the missing COVID funds. It's like, this is just a level of corruption that is so in your face and disturbing to anybody who is even slightly connected to what's going on. There are those who are outside of it who, and we talk about this on the show frequently, work 2-3 jobs, 70 hours a week, don't have time to get engaged with a program like ours. I mean, I work 70 hours a week. This is part of it. But there's so many people that don't have time to get engaged. And that's what I'm troubled by. And I think a lot of those folks are the ones who didn't turn up in the last election. Along with, as Mr. Beaver can attest, I think we should, once the writ is dropped, I think no polls should be released to the public. Because I think in the last election, the way the media said Doug is the next premier, that just ruined it for everybody. And a lot of people, I think, stayed home, said, well, my vote isn't going to count anyway. So, but that's my opinion.
I think we can do a few things about that. I like, for example, in terms of people staying at home, one thing I like is the per vote subsidy for political parties. Because if you're not wealthy, how do you participate in election finance? Which is really, I mean, you can see how important election finance is to Doug Ford.
Right.
Oh, yes.
But if you're not wealthy, how do you participate in the same way that wealthy people can? Well, one way is to make your vote count towards public funding for political parties.
Right.
If you donate, you might think it's your own money, but you get that tax refund, so it's also public financing for political parties. So if you are of limited means and your vote can result in a couple of bucks a year to the political party of your choice, I think that somewhat levels the playing field in terms of people being able to participate in election finance. And back to your original point, it means that even if you think that the party that you prefer doesn't have a chance to win in your riding, you can still go out and cast that vote and say, I am putting in $2 a year for the next 4 years to the party of my choice, and I'm going to go out and vote for that reason. So I think it has a lot of advantages for our democratic system. And it's not unfair because, as I said earlier, a private donor, one of those people who donated $3,000 to Doug Ford and got a whole bunch of other people to do that. They got like $1,500 each got $1,500 back on their Ontario taxes.
Right.
So they're getting subsidized too. So I think it makes a lot of sense. Another idea I have is first of all, this will sound a little self-serving given the position of the Liberal Party right now, but the criterion for having official party status in the Ontario legislature is having 12 seats, 10% of the seats. And I think we could change that pretty easily because it's changing the standing orders of the legislature, which is easy to change, is to say if you get 10% of the vote, then you get official party status. And official party status comes with more speaking time, funding for policy research, for communications. It's worth quite a lot. And why don't we make that based on percentage of the vote instead of seats? It's a tiny move towards proportional representation, but it's another way to say, hey, don't worry if the candidate in your riding that you like the most doesn't have a chance. Go out and vote because it'll count towards the official party status. So I think there's a lot of easy things to do to at least partially address here the point you brought up, Mr. Grizzly.
I think I agree with both those positions, Ted, because, for example, when I lived in Ottawa, federally, my riding was Ottawa-Vanier, which has been Liberal red solid since I think the 30s. And when the Green Party was emerging, basically as a citizen, I knew I couldn't lose because I was pretty certain that a Liberal candidate was going to win federally because they had always had for the longest time, so that there would be someone that was more progressive than not in Parliament. And I was able to vote for a couple of years for the Green Party because I believe in the environment, and I was able to give them my $2 in order to encourage them when they were starting up, because I believed that the political scene would do well with the party that was representing environmental issues. I knew they weren't going to win, and back then they weren't even getting a seat, I think. It was before Elizabeth May had a seat. But it was like, this is a good idea. We should have this. I'm going to encourage this. But I was in a position in my riding that I knew I couldn't lose because the candidate I wanted to win was going to win, and I can encourage someone else with my $2. And then we have one of our kids here said that that's a great thing too. She says my riding is, fully conservative and probably always will be. And, so yeah, I would like to give my $2 to a party. And moving that from seats to popular vote, also as well for official party status, I believe that that's a smarter idea because, with the vagaries of our system with first past the post, you could be getting 36% of your vote in your riding and still lose it because of vote splits, right? And there's no benefit for your party, and there's no benefit for whatever movement or whatever political view as a result of that. And if you're doing 36% or getting 32%, that's pretty good. That's really good. Some people win. your seats with 36, but you can also lose with 36 depending on how the votes counts go. So making it a percentage of vote share, you know, that seems to be more reflective of the will of the people in terms of financing a party. And you're right, we already do publicly finance parties. It's just we do it through the political donation tax credit, which gives, as you say, more power to the people that have the money to make the donation in terms of deciding who gets to survive and who doesn't. And if money is if seats are voice in that sense, well, I mean, if we're talking about a democracy, it is giving more voice to more people. So picking the system that allows more parties to be represented regardless of vagaries of the system seems to be the smarter and more democratic way to go. So I believe that these are really good ideas. I would like to see them implemented, to be totally honest.
When I lived in that riding, I did the same thing as you, sir.
Yep.
I voted for the Green Party because I knew Morrill was going to
Right.
win. It was a given.
Right.
It was a
He
given.
was such a great
So
man.
it was like, well, the way I saw it was it's a win-win situation. A good man is going to get reelected. He's a good member of parliament. He did a lot of good works. And I could cast a vote for the Green Party when they were sort of getting up and running. I mean, they've been around for a little bit at that point, but it was like I liked what they had to say, and I knew I was not spoiling the ballot, and I was not holding my nose either.
Right.
I knew Morrill was going to win. It was just a given, but I was able to give you, like you say, my $2 went towards that party to help them get built up. And, as we always say, diversity is our strength. So, having a diverse parliament, I think it's a good thing.
I think it's a good thing too.
I mean,
Ted, our kits liked the idea that you represented both an urban and rural riding. We always hear about urban issues, and one of my complaints about the liberal movement, federally and provincially, was that there appeared to be, like for the longest time, no outreach whatsoever to rural communities. There's no rural community strategy. There's, federally, we have a minister of rural and northern affairs along with other stuff, I think Dan Vandal. But in 8 years, I haven't seen the release of a specific rural strategy. It just seems that we're just abandoning those seats to the Conservatives. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you could possibly represent both at the same time, and what are rural issues that you're working, and especially if in your travels, because I assume that you've been to a lot of rural ridings as well.
Yes, I've been traveling around the province for over a year now. Yes, it is. The provincial Liberal Party is much worse off than the federal Liberal Party in that it has no representation and dead riding associations in a lot of rural and northern Ontario. And I think it came the Liberal Party started a long time ago as a rural reform party. And we've completely, parties evolve over the decades. So we've turned into a more of an urban party. But I think we need to go back to reconnect with rural and northern Ontario. So I think it's important to have somebody who is used to running for election and listening to voters' concerns, having rural residents write into the constituency office. It's important to have somebody who, with that experience, to lead the charge to make the Liberal Party relevant again in those areas. I think it really involves spending time, and I would like to campaign in every riding until the very, very end, where maybe you make some tactical decisions to focus on the ones you have a chance of winning in the last month or so. But I think it's important for the Liberal Party to try to campaign in every riding. It's a good discipline for us because it makes us listen to rural and northern and small town residents. This has been happening. I think we've taken the first step in this leadership contest that we're in right now, because the way the leadership contest is set up, every riding is worth 100 points. It doesn't matter if it's way up somewhere north or some southwestern riding that we're not going to win for 1 or 2 or 3 elections. But it's forcing all of the leadership candidates to go and spend a lot of time and listen to people who live in those areas. So that's the first step. But I think the next step is to put out some policy, some initial policy. The Liberal Party just formed a rural and northern commission.
Right.
So that's going to be a source of activity. I want to put out some policy early. The argument against putting out policy early is other parties will steal it. Well, I don't care. we're gonna put out good policy.
Right.
So
That's
go
an
ahead,
important
steal
factor.
it. Because I want. But the thing is, if you're reconnecting and starting from a low level, you need people to know, like, what do you stand for? And so I say, go ahead and put out some policy, nominate candidates early, and I want to make sure that we have local candidates who are good advocates. So, like in the last election, we parachuted somebody from the GTA into Sault Ste. Marie and somebody from Sudbury into Timiskaming Cochrane, and we had no candidate in Timmins. So
Mhm.
that's pretty sad.
And Timmins is not like a small area up there. I mean, population-wise, it's kind
No.
of a major city up there.
Yeah. In each of the northern and rural ridings, I want to have a local person who can pound the table when they get elected and at Queen's Park and advocate for their region. But they need to be armed with policy as well. And I've committed to having 3 separate sections in our policy platform: separate rural, northern, and agriculture.
Okay.
Because there are rural issues that are not specifically agricultural issues. A northern issue is different.
And northern
from
issues that are not just
many
like
northern issues that are not generally rural issues. And so I have committed to having 3 separate areas to separate those 3. And the reason I chose those 3 to separate is because they were lumped together in the last Liberal platform.
Yeah.
And so it's
Well,
really
you've
important
put
to
some
separate
thought
them
into
out
this.
to reckon. And that's a really good symbolic way of recognizing that you're trying to be articulate when it comes to the parts of the province that you've lost contact with. So that's another thing that I think we can do. And we're not going to. The important thing is we don't put out a whole platform, and people have to accept, like, this is not our whole platform, because you go out and you listen, and then you adjust your platform based on what you learn. And maybe there's some local issues that go into our platform. So.
Right. So what you've been
So you also ask, what are some of the policies? So
yes.
So one of my signature policies is to preserve prime agricultural land.
Okay.
And that is connected with stopping urban sprawl. We
Right.
can't protect prime agricultural land without stopping urban sprawl. And then we can't stop urban sprawl without building at least medium density housing inside urban boundaries, and even higher density when you're around transit hubs or subway stations or something. So all of these, like urban land use and reconnecting the Liberal Party with, say, agriculture. It's all these policies are connected. They don't work without each other. So it's a long-term strategy. I think one thing I say is the best farmland in Canada can be found between the Oak Ridges Moraine and Niagara Escarpment and Lake Ontario. But a lot of that is now called Toronto and Mississauga and Brampton. Now, I think it's important for the whole of Ontario benefits from a world-class city like Toronto, but it's time to stop. It's time to stop paving over our prime agricultural land. It's time to just say, okay, let's draw the line and say that's it. We really need the prime agricultural land for our future, as an important insurance policy for the future.
So could you explain to the people who are listening what it is about Kingston that allows you to be someone who has experience with both a rural riding and an urban riding?
So Kingston, the riding is Kingston and the Islands. We have about 100 farms. In the redistribution of ridings, the northern part of Kingston, north of the 401, is coming back into the riding that I first got elected in. And there's more farms in northern Ontario. But the eastern part of the city of Kingston, Wolfe Island and Howe Island, and the northern part of Kingston, and a tiny sliver of the west of Kingston is agricultural or rural in any case. And we have a number of farms. And so I represent them, and we even have a mine in the city of Kingston.
That's right.
Which is I always bring that up when I'm making a connection with the mining community. It's like, hey, I'm the only Liberal I'm on the only Liberal MPP who has a mine in the city that they
Yeah.
live in. Right now, it's north of the 401, so it's coming back into the riding after redistribution. But it is part of the city of Kingston. So it's the representation, that experience that I have, that allows me to make that connection.
Right. Now, when you were talking earlier, you mentioned in the north, there are issues that you wouldn't think are northern issues that have nothing to do with agriculture or being technically rural, in that the sense that normal people would normally think of it. I know, for example, in Thunder Bay, for example, there is a very, very big problem when it comes to uh, drug use and methamphetamines and injection drug use. And you wouldn't think about that. You'd think that that's a big urban problem. But I mean, Thunder Bay is, again, like one of the biggest cities in the area, but don't think.
Well, I think
Thunder Bay has a
addictions
like
are
problems, right?
worse everywhere in the north. Problems with addictions, and services for healthcare and mental health and addictions are worse in the north. Thunder Bay has the additional problem. It has gang violence related to the drug trade, and in a bad way. So it's a theme that I've Thunder Bay especially, but cities in the north, communities in Northern Ontario are suffering more per capita from the addictions crisis than the rest of Ontario.
Do you have you thought of anything policy-wise that might be able to be put in place with regard to that?
Well, one thing is just its resources. I think that the provincial government should upload the cost of and make predictable the funding for addiction services, for addiction treatment.
Okay.
Because you have, and I think this still hasn't been resolved, but for example, Thunder Bay and Sudbury, their provincial grant, they get these short-term grants, like a couple of years or something, for addictions services, and it runs out at the end of the year. So they don't know if they're getting another installment or not. The province is reviewing the consumption and treatment sites because there was some incident at one of them. So how can a municipality plan for this $1 or $2 million question mark in their budget? It's very hard, and especially, and like you're coming down, it's only a month away, a little over a month away. So what do you do? Your people are going to leave because they want a job after, if the funding is uncertain, and all sorts of things. And the other thing is that people get shuffled around. When you look at what happens to people who are homeless or suffering from addictions, they get shuffled around from municipality to municipality. They're given bus tickets to go. Right. I talked to the mayor of Timmins, and she says, yeah, we get people who are given bus tickets to come to Timmins. So if people are moving around from community to community, it's clearly a municipal, provincial, province-wide problem. So it should be managed, I think, from the provincial budget. The other thing is, if you stop people from traveling to larger cities to get treatment, people can stay in their home communities. You get that support network, fans, family, that social network, which is extremely valuable and extremely difficult to replace by some sort of by money and some sort of government structure. The people people you grew up with, it's really important, I think, in the fight against addiction.
Right.
I couldn't agree more, because you take somebody out of the environment that they've only ever known, and let's drop them into downtown Toronto to a treatment center. It's like, that's detrimental. If anything, I think it's more harmful, because you've sequestered them away from their friends and family, their community, their social safety net, their social network for 30 to 60 days, sometimes 90, depending upon how ill they are.
Yeah, in Thunder Bay, like you have people coming into Thunder Bay for services. And they say it's like whatever 30,000, some very, very large number of people come into Thunder Bay from the surrounding regions. So, I mean, they did it for, they centralized the services for efficiency, but there's a loss in that people are taken away from their communities, and there's a cost for that.
Right.
Well, as someone can attest, as when I was a young boy living in Gander, Newfoundland, I was very ill, and I had to go to St. John's, which is a 4-hour plus drive. I didn't have an addiction. I was just very ill. I was 11 years old at the time. But to be away from your family, your friends, it's really traumatic. And I still bear the emotional scars of that. So I understand when you say keep people in the community and heal them as much as you can.
Ted, one of the kits actually just got there a little bit right before me. He asked, what are Ted's thoughts on Ontario forcing long-term disabled people to live well below the poverty line? Any thoughts on the ODSP? We have a very big disability community, and this is a subject we've been talking about a lot. And while we're talking about that as well, if you can tell me about ODSP as well, under the previous Liberal government, there was a UBI project pilot project that had been started, and Premier Ford promised us that he would let it run its course. And as we know, we know what the value of a Premier Ford promise is. He promised he wouldn't touch it, but then he put his hands all over it, and then a whole bunch of others, and then the iron ring and all of that kind of stuff.
And the green belt.
But with regard to affordability and cost of living, and so the UBI, but in particularly ODSP.
Yeah. Well, ODSP needs to be much, much higher. I have people sending in their household budgets to me at the constituency office saying, look here, sometimes I ask them to send in the numbers too, because I like to look at the numbers of their actual household budget and say, look, here's my statement, here's how much everything costs, here's how much money I have left, here's how much I have to spend on this or that in my household budget. And it's clearly way, 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 way too low. It should be much higher. Eventually we need to aim for, it should be approaching what you might get from minimum wage, at least. I mean, that kind of makes sense. Maybe it's, I don't know what it is exactly, but it needs to be much higher. Some people have said double, and that's the right ballpark. Double would get you something like the same as somebody who is working minimum wage. But let me articulate that a little bit, because there's some things that I think that minimum wage should depend on where you live. It should be tied to the cost of living of where you live, and I think it should be adjusted automatically for inflation so that it doesn't become a political football. And I think if we do that with minimum wage, that there's an opportunity to tie ODSP region by region to a regionally appropriate cost of living. So ODSP could be, I don't know, I'm just making up some numbers here, but let's say ODSP should be like 80% of minimum wage or 90% of minimum wage or something like that. I don't, it's maybe the time to figure out exact numbers, and it is not right now, but it should be much, much higher. Right now, ODSP is barely half of minimum wage, something like that, roughly speaking.
It's not livable.
It's not livable at all. And I can see that from all the household budgets that people are sending in. So this government, all they've done so far is they increased ODSP by 5%, which doesn't even cover inflation during their term, and they have made ODSP automatically go up by inflation. So that's a good thing. But the 5% is way too low. People on ODSP have actually fallen behind since Doug Ford took over. So one thing that
we did give them credit for raising it, though.
Sorry?
They're the first. We did give them credit for raising it. I mean, it's minuscule,
that's right.
and it's not going to help. But they're the first government to do it in, 30 years, I think, or something like that?
I don't know about 30 years, but yeah, in a good number of years.
A long time.
Maybe 10 years or something. The other thing I would say
it had been a long time. And again, it's still too low.
There's another thing in ODSP. ODSP has various complicated things, like there's rules about gifts, but one of the rules is if you can work part-time. So some people on ODSP can work part-time, and the way it was set up before February of this year. So last year, if you could work part-time and you earned more than $200 a month, there was a 50% clawback. So basically you're paying a 50% marginal income tax rate if you could work part-time. And this is we want people to work when they can work, and we had a labor shortage in the economy. So why would you discourage people from earning extra income? And
Well, if
so,
you're not even making minimum wage yet, why would you claw back anything?
yeah, why would you? Well, so somebody set that rule a long time ago, and so I was the only MPP to. Lots of people talked about ODSP in the last year in the legislature, but I decided I would focus on the clawback, and the reason is, again, it's like, how do you people on the left side of the spectrum, they get the need to increase ODSP, but how do you convince somebody on the right side? Well, on the right side, you say, listen, this is 50% marginal tax rate. You want somebody on ODSP to pay the same marginal tax rate as Premier Ford?
Yeah.
How does that make sense? So, hey, conservatives, don't be a high tax party. So that's how you kind of get under the skin of people who are fiscally think sort of
Mhm.
fiscal conservatives, and you say, listen, or small government conservatives, sorry, and you say, hey,
Mhm.
government, why are you have such high taxes on disabled people? And so that's what I stood up in the legislature and said several times. And um, uh, a good thing that happened in the 2022 fall economic statement, and I can't really take credit because I can't draw a straight line between my standing up in the legislature and complaining and asking about this issue and the action. But in the fall economic statement in 2022, they raised that threshold to $1,000. So people on ODSP can now work part-time and make up to $1,000 a month with no clawback. So that was an improvement, and it was welcomed by the. Now it's a small percentage of people on ODSP. Most can't work at all, but
Mhm.
some can
Mhm.
work, and at least that was one step.
Mhm.
But it's a step. When you're in opposition, you don't control a lot of things. But what you can do is you can understand where the government feels vulnerable, and conservatives do feel vulnerable if you accuse them of being high tax
Mhm.
advocates for high taxes, and so that's the tact that I took.
But also, as you
And
mentioned, for example, if we're talking about the labor shortage, there's maybe not a lot of people on ODSP who can work full time, but with technology and zooming and camera and
Mhm.
whatnot, there might be a lot of people who might be able to do a few hours of work per week and start their own little business in order to supplement their income. The thing I've never understood about our ODSP policy is that it seems to single out disabled people for extra special treatment. You can't receive gifts if you have somebody living with you. Everybody in Ontario is allowed to have somebody living with them without taking a hit. Usually that improves your income, your financial situation, because you're splitting costs too. But people who are disabled are not allowed to do that. Why are the disabled
yeah, so
people
that's another thing. I think that's the next step to fight is all the clawbacks based on income from spouses and partners, and it does a lot of it doesn't make sense. You're just hurting the people who need help the most by having by penalizing somebody living with somebody else with an income so that they get taken care of. So that's another thing that our office gets, and we're trying to change. Now, one sort of good thing on the horizon is that there's this federal bill now
Yes.
by disability supports, and they're trying to figure out how to implement that. And again, what
Mhm.
my office is trying to keep close tabs on is to make sure that the province doesn't say, "Oh, you're getting a federal benefit. We're going to take some of your provincial benefit away."
Right.
That we want to prevent anything like that happening. Now, the
Well,
federal
the party
benefit
that
is not
seems to
going to kick
love
in for
bootstraps.
the better part of a year because they're still setting it up. And so
Mm.
it means, like, if you're on ODSP and that's the income that you have, you can't wait
Right.
even 1 month. Like so we're still continuing to push the government and tell the story of people who are on ODSP and just talk about their household budgets.
Mhm. And is a
Well,
UBI
the party that loves well, go
so
ahead, sir.
I was
Go
just
ahead.
wondering, and is a UBI, something that you're considering to
Yeah,
either
I would definitely put back I would want to do another pilot because there's a couple of things that we need to figure out in UBIs. One is how do we deal with people with disabilities on UBI, because disabilities, they come in many different types with many different needs. And so the word, the letter U in UBI stands for universal. And it's so you can't just have one size fits all for people with disabilities, because it's really different.
Yeah.
Well, I was about to say that the party that loves bootstraps sure does like to take the boots away from you once you start to earn a little bit, right? Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Oh, not that way. We're taking the boots away from you. Good luck.
So I'd want to test that. And the other thing to test is, how do you keep track of income? Do you keep track of people's income based on last year's tax return, which is relatively easy and inexpensive? Or do you track everybody's income month to month and then have UBI kick in as soon as they lose their income? That's more expensive and complicated from a bureaucratic point of view. So we have to make a decision and test that.
We could implement an AI for that.
Well, I think it's a matter of collecting the data in all these different living situations and work situations that people have it. So it would be, you'd have to.
If I might make a recommendation, if the Liberals do get into power and they are pursuing the UBI, please do it in the first 2 of the 4 years of the mandate, so nobody could come and cut the pilot project rather than at the end, so that we can actually see one from beginning to end. That would be so nice.
There's a movement to do a really full pilot on Prince Edward Island.
Yes.
And the advantage of that is PEI is small, and but it's a province all by itself. And so from an administrative point of view, it's a really good place to do it. So I know at least one of the people who's pushing for PEI to be a federal test for UBI.
Right.
Didn't Kitchener Waterloo just do that?
They voted on,
or was it Guelph?
No, it was Kitchener Waterloo. I think that there was a vote.
It was Kitchener Waterloo.
Yeah, there was a vote to do I think a regional one. To see what would happen, and I believe that there, as Ted Hsu was mentioning, there was a bill that's coming from the federal Senate with regard to UBI as well, that they've been discussing that. Fetish question of mine, as a Franco-Ontarian, Mr. Hsu. Ontario's been a province for over 150 years, and we still do not have an autonomous, dedicated university for Franco-Ontarians, and this government has refused to put money towards it. Said they would, but they wouldn't. And then there was a couple of other projects. There was supposed to be campus expansion at Sir Wilfrid Laurier and 3 others, and they canceled that. And then Laurentian University in Sudbury lost a whole bunch of programs, including some very key programs, the midwifery program and some program in indigenous social work, which would have been, as a government, I would have seen that happen. I would have rushed in with some funding right there to preserve those 2 things, and they just let them die. So what can you tell us about post-secondary education, funding for it, particularly Francophone University and universities that have regional specialty programs like that?
Well, for post-secondary education in general, Ontario has been underfunding it. So per full-time student, Ontario has the lowest funding for post-secondary education per full-time student. And the Ford government, they cut tuition when they came in, but then they didn't compensate the institutions to replace the lost tuition income. And then they haven't really adjusted things for inflation, so budget has come down. So a lot of post-secondary institutions, like in my hometown, Queen's University is running a deficit this year, and they've got across the board cuts and hiring freezes, and some people are anyways, they're going to cut back on some of the course offerings and so on. I think that so they've been trying to trim whatever they can for years now because of the cut in tuition income and the lack of adjustment for inflation. When it comes to a Francophone university, I've said that I would support the financing for l'Université de Sudbury Francophone University, separate from Laurentian. And the worry there is that when Laurentian had financial problems, they cut all sorts of things, and there wasn't, the Francophone community felt like they didn't have much control over what was cut in terms of preserving some key Francophone programs from a provincial point of view. So l'Université de Sudbury would have an independent administration and independent control over teaching and programs from Laurentian. They might be co-located to some extent for efficiencies, but it would separate. They would make their own separate decisions about what programs to cut or what programs to build, and so I've committed to that. I think it's, when you're thinking about how to preserve a language in a culture, it's important to push the boundaries of a language. It's important to use it, not just like it's my Chinese. My Chinese is good at home Chinese, but it's not good it's not good in a professional setting, in a business setting, or an academic setting. But and so it impedes my ability to transmit the language to the next generation. But in a post-secondary setting like a university, you've got teaching, you've got professional training, you've got research. People are pushing the boundaries they're just really pushing the limits of a language if you at an institution like that. And that's what you need, I think, to keep a language, the use of a language, alive, and something that can be much more easily transmitted to the next generation, and be relevant, like it's more relevant in their everyday lives.
Right. Mr. Wesley, did you have a question?
No. I had a few different thoughts, but I'm trying to collate them currently. So the squirrels are running around right now.
I think we only have you until about 8 or so. Is that correct, sir?
Yeah, roughly. It's
roughly.
I don't have a tight timeline.
Okay. Do you, Mr. Wesley?
Yeah, I do, actually.
Okay. All right. So do we have time for one more question?
Yeah.
All right.
Fast.
Yes. In overall, there's all the topics and whatnot, but more in terms about you, where does your passion for politics come from? And what is it about you that you are personally, that you can bring to the game that no one else can bring? Yes, that would make it so that not only you would be a good leader, but a good premier.
I am really interested in long-term things. And sometimes like, for example, 10 years ago, we could have looked at the data right now and said, there's going to be a lot of doctors, family doctors retiring in the 2020s. So we better do something about it. But that didn't happen. And one of the problems is it takes more than one election cycle to train doctors and nurse practitioners. And it just, it burns me up that we didn't do that. So I want to be a leader who thinks long-term. It's one of the reasons why I'm interested in things like climate change. But I like thinking long-term. And I want to be a leader who does the right thing and doesn't worry if somebody else gets the credit 2 elections later. That's one of the weaknesses of our system, is that people have to worry about getting elected in the next election. And so it's really hard to plan long term. And then sometimes, like, governments change. And here in Toronto, I'm actually sitting in Toronto right now because the legislature is in session. But in Toronto, you hear stories about, like, they dug a subway tunnel and then they filled it in. Like, what is going on? And it's because different governments get elected and then they change plans. And so I think it's important to think long. Sometimes, and I've also promised in this leadership contest, like, sometimes I will keep to the plan that the Conservatives have if changing the plan is worse than just keeping to the second best plan. Like, maybe the second best plan is better than no plan. And so sometimes you And it's hard because you're criticizing the government for doing this and that, but sometimes you're just going to have to stick to it, because it'd be a big waste of money to put in what you think is the best plan and abandon the second best plan. But you often waste money, and so I'm willing to do that as well as make decisions where I don't get somebody else gets the political benefit 2 elections from now.
See,
I think that's really
respect the
important
heck
and
out of
different
that.
about how the incentives that are in place right now in politics.
Well, the system that we have right now that's troubled me so much so, it's that the next federal or provincial government comes in and looks at a program, says, we don't like it, we're canceling it. I'm like, but isn't it a good program that's benefiting people?
People planned around it.
Yeah, but it's not a conservative idea, so we're just going to kill it. I'm like, like Doug came in and he okay, we know he killed the UBI, but then he decided no electric charging stations and pulled all the funding on that, and then pulled up the stations
That we're already there. Why?
Now
already there.
we're reinvesting.
Why?
Like, why did you do that? They were there. They were working.
paid for
Just
them.
leave
Why?
it be.
And it's
you
just
seem to be the
long
type
term.
of-
Like eventually they're going to be used, so just leave them in. Don't spend any money.
Exactly. Well, you're the type of individual who, as Linda said, wise men plant trees that they know they'll never sit beneath. It's like, do something good for all of us. If somebody else takes the credit, who cares? If we all benefit, that's what matters. I miss the days when politicians, even the official opposition, could look across the aisle and go, you know what? That is a good idea, and we're going to support it. We used to have a little bit more of that. It seems to have disappeared in the last 20 plus years.
I'll
I'd
give
like
you
to
like
get
a
a
really
little
interesting
bit of that.
example of that. I was just listening on the radio. There's this new book out about Pearson and Diefenbaker, and
Mhm.
one of the points that was made was that the move to make the immigration ministry less racist started in the Diefenbaker years.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
he never gets the credit for that.
No, I didn't know that. I'm learning that right now. There you go. I lied. I have one more question because I think the kids would be very remiss if I did not ask it. Given all the scandal with the current government of Ontario, we might actually be dealing with the most financially, criminally corrupt government in Canadian history, any level. Is there anything that can be done with regards to law or legislation with the manner in which contracts are doled out in any way, shape, or form that would preserve the public good and maintain public trust? Because there's a lot of things that are being done on our time, on our dime, and in our name that are just not okay. Well, potentially criminal.
Yeah. I think
it seems to me that
it's more
legislation around that.
Probably some legislation around transparency, because even going back to the Shoppers Drug Mart point, Mr. Grizzly, about they're getting a contract to distribute the vaccines. I think, like, we don't even know if that contract were out there in public, then people would see, like, what conditions do they have to fulfill. If the contracts having to do with Ontario Place were public, then we would see what's going on there.
Well, that's just
the whole process for that the Ford government took to take land out of the Greenbelt was opaque, and that needed to be transparent as well. A lot of safeguards that should have been there were bypassed. So I don't have the magic answer, but I think transparency plus the attention of the public, both things together, would go a long ways.
We have one of the kids here. Kid Jim says, how about some legislation to enforce the rules of honor that are supposedly followed in the House?
Well, I think the thing about honor is that if you think you need laws to enforce the honor, then they're not really honorable.
But it seems we do need the laws to enforce to keep people in check, to make sure the people that don't want to be honorable, saying, you know what, if you're not, there might be a consequence. So let's provide you a little incentive to be honorable. All right. Ted.
Well, we could have recall, the ability to recall, which we don't have now.
Yes,
some Westminster countries do have recall, the ability to recall, but we don't.
I think they do in New Zealand and Australia, I believe. Do they not? I could be incorrect,
Maybe
but I think
Scotland
they
as
do.
well. So
Indeed. All right. I think we've come to the end of our time, but if you would stay with us, because after we roll the credits, we do a little Easter egg, and I've got something for you. Mr. Shu. Kits and Cubs, that's the end of this episode of the True North Eager Beaver interview project. We hope that you love listening to us because we love making this for you. Remember that sharing is caring and word of mouth is priceless. So please, 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 please tell your peeps and poops all about us, because democracy is something that you do. Again, Kits and Cubs, write those letters. Mr. Shu can tell you like this. When you write letters, when you ask for meetings, it matters. Is that not the case? Mr. Sue?
it does. Oh yes, it does. It does matter, especially if it's we know which ones are generated by computers because we get 100 of the same copy. But when somebody handwrites something, it gets really special attention.
See, kids, what I told you, when you handwrite, you take the time. It matters. People notice that. And of course, go get your XBB shots and your flu shots, your pneumococcal shots, and your RSV shots. Please do your best to keep our hospitals unclogged and make our help so that our hospital staff that have just worked so hard over the last few years actually have a normal winter for once. That would be nice. All right. If you would like to make sure that you do not miss an episode, when we have something fresh off the bandwidth, we will come straight to you. If you go to our pod page, that's podpage.com/the True North Eager Beaver, lowercase letters with a hyphen between each one of those words, or you can scan that QR code and that will bring you there. And if you like to smash with buttons, well, hey, then you go to our True North Eager Beaver Incorporated YouTube site. And then we have 3 buttons for you: like, share, and subscribe. Smash all you want. Have at it. Have a great time. Okay. And if you would like to support us and encourage us to do more, well, you can make a contribution to the Eager Beaver Lodge Emergency Hydration Fund so that you could keep us moist. And that way we can deliver. We like to speak moistly to our kids. So that we can deliver this product that you so love. And we appreciate that you support us. Thank you very much. From the Beaver Lodge, this is the Eager Beaver saying, it can be a tough world out there, so please be kind to and gentle with yourselves. Mr. Grizzly, some words of wisdom?
I'm going to repeat the thing I've been saying a lot lately because I think it's important, and that's to remember that when you vote, and please, when there's an election, whether it's federal, provincial, or municipal, vote. And don't vote against the guy you dislike, or the gal, or the person. Vote for the person in your riding that will benefit your community. It will benefit your friends, your neighbors, the vulnerable members of society that have been cast aside. Vote for making the country better, not just for yourself. And don't vote because, well, I don't like that guy. I'm voting for that party to get rid of him. Well, that's not achieving anything positive. Vote for the best person in your community that will do the most for your community.
And remember, kids, friends don't let friends vote alone, so bring friends with you. All right.
Hey, can I add something to that?
Absolutely. That's what I'm going to say. What are your words?
I want to encourage people, people often don't think about nominations. So in safe ridings, where one party is likely to win, and sometimes there's a nomination contest. Get involved in those, because you can decide who's the party candidate, and one of them might be better than the other. And your vote counts for a lot in nominations. Like you might get 1,000 people voting in a nomination to decide who the candidate is in a safe riding. Now you have to join the party, but your vote is like 1 out of 1,000, whereas in a general election, your vote could be 1 out of 50,000. So it's a place that people don't know about, that they can get involved and choose the candidate. And the candidate there can be very different candidates.
Something we've talked about on this show actually several times, and Mr. Beaver actually did join a party so that he could cast a ballot.
Twice now. Federally and provincially. I did join the Ontario Liberal Party so I could cast a vote in this race as well. For some reason, I have not received my nomination, my voting ballot, though, so I'm going to have to call someone because the vote's coming and everybody says that they've received it. Mine has not arrived. All right. Mr. Grizzly, please roll the credits and stick with us, Ted. You are listening to a True North Eager Beaver media podcast. The True North Eager Beaver podcasts are proudly brought to you by our founding sponsors, the Miss V Mysteries from Corvid Moon Publishing, your source for science fiction, fantasy, and cozy mysteries featuring a broad diversity of characters. CanadianTarot.com, your uniquely Canadian online eclectic tarot community and forum, and The Peppermaster, hot pepper sauces made from fresh farm ingredients to thrill your taste buds and expand your mind. I wanted to point out a Saucy Sea Witch contribution here. A vote is not a Valentine.
I like that one. Yeah,
Yes.
I'm just reading it. It's so good.
Yeah. Vote is not a Valentine. It is a chess piece with which you use to affect the world. There you go. Sometimes when we have an interview, we have a couple of rapid fire, just fun questions to get people to know. So the first thing that comes to your mind: chocolate or vanilla?
Vanilla.
Coffee or tea?
Right now, coffee.
Morning person or evening person?
Evening.
Your favorite sport?
Gosh. I guess soccer.
Okay. And your favorite musical band?
Tragically Hip.
Yeah, that's my band.
Nice. Nice.
All right. Have a great day, kids.
See ya.
Thank you, Dad.